Okay. So, hi guys. We're just going to wait a few minutes as the participants come in. I love watching the numbers go scrolling up on the bottom of the screen there. So we're just waiting a minute or so to get a critical mass in, and then we'll make a start. But I'm joined today by John Mead and Luke Dooley. I'll introduce them in more detail in a little while. Let's just wait a little minute more. And as we get to sort of a minute past, I'll kick off. All right. So let's make a start. We're here to discuss building trust in data, the essential role of data lineage, and John Mead and Luke Dooley are going to share that with us in just a short moment. Before that, I've got some housekeeping. Can we go to the next slide, John? So I will pop these links into the chat in a minute, but these are helpful links for today and around Oracle Analytics, the May 2023 new features, and the community we're in. So let's continue. Next slide. Please go and visit our website. You'll find all of our TechCasts are archived there. So even this will appear in our archive, today's session, within the next week or so. And there's some really good information here because we try and get whatever's cutting edge at the time presented. And if you have an abstract for us for the future, please do submit it. Again, you can do that from this page. So do go and visit this if you need to have a look at some of past videos. And yeah, let's carry on. Next slide. We have our own merchandise. If you, again, visit the website, and you can get some more interesting merchandise than normal. This was all designed by our own Dr. Abby Giles Haig. It takes a doctor to design something so amazing. And then continue. Lots of ways of communicating with us. Again, I will pop these links for these in the chat once we get going. I just can't multitask because I'm a man. There's lots of ways. Probably my favorite here is the Slack. If you want to chat with folk, there's a lot of Oracle product management, as well as people like our guests today on here. And if you've got questions or things to share with the community at large, this is a great place to do it. Next slide, sir. And this is just around the corner now. Here's me running a panel in 2023, last year. Handsome devil. And I just want to encourage you, there is nothing quite like being in person. It's also worth noting that our main sponsor this year is Rittman Mead, who are presenting today. So it's a good sign to show that people are really involved in our community. But it's also, although it's not massive, it is very focused, and we have a good attendance of Oracle product management there if you want to have one-to-one conversations with them. But also if you want to rub shoulders with a good selection of Oracle ACE and Oracle ACE directors, you'll find them there. So join us from April the 9th to 11th. And now, really, just my last job before we go on is to introduce John and Luke. So John is the founder and CEO of Rittman Mead Consulting. He basically, when you say globally renowned, he's got lots of mates all over the world. We all know John, and he's been around for more than 25 years. Background as a software engineer, and he has been, if you like, witnessing the evolution of business intelligence and analytics. And in fact, I venture to say he's been part of that evolution. And I always try and leave you with a fun fact about someone, and you're welcome to answer when you start, John. But John made the mistake of letting us know that he's a DJ, so there may be some work for you to do at this at the summit. But he's also in pursuit of that in his early years. Had run-ins with border patrols and all sorts of exciting things. So I'll leave him to explain that himself. And Luke shows John and I up with his youth, and he's a bright and promising young man who has been to the University of Sussex, and he got a degree in computing science, he has done everything from build websites, and he is now working with Rittman Mead, and he's done a lot of work with Oracle Data Integrator, ODI, Oracle Apex. And so his interesting fact is that he has a shrimp tank. I know I'm messing that up, but he'll correct me when he starts as well. But apparently it's got lots of bright little shrimp that wouldn't do for bait with what I would normally use them for out there. So anyway, without further ado, thank you so much, gents, for being on today. I look forward to hearing what you're doing. And I'll leave camera now and hand over to you, John.
Roger, thank you very much, as always. Everyone, thank you for attending. As you can see by the title of the presentation, we're going to talk about really data lineage. We're going to walk through the role of data lineage and give a demo of some accelerators and tooling that we've built in that. Before we start, Rittman Mead, as Roger said, we are sponsoring the event over at Redwood Shores, which we did actually the same last year. It was a great event. And again, I think Roger sort of nailed it. It's quite a personal event. It's a really good place to, actually go and hang out with people, spend some time talking to people. Rittman Mead itself, probably the best way we can describe ourselves is we help people get the most out of their investment in Oracle's data analytics, AI products and services. And again, we have been around a while. We have all through that time had a blog, and I think a lot of people have either contributed to or read articles on our blog. I think we're up to, well, certainly over 2,500 posts, going right back to when Oracle acquired Siebel and the sort of birth of OBIE, excuse me, and some of the early tooling. So yeah, the kind of tools that we're using at the moment, I think, right from their kind of history, there's some interesting information out there. So I think in terms of starting this presentation, what I wanted to look at it was from a kind of business or an end user's point of view, and sort of ask some questions. And that's, have you ever been in a meeting where different people have produced reports with different numbers for the same metric? And again, this is something that kind of came up often in conversations that we had speaking to our customers or speaking to, say, people at conferences. And really what kind of that boiled down to was a sort of fundamental question of do users trust their data? So the goal of, most of the work that we do in terms of, pushing data through data pipelines, ETL processes, data warehouses into reports and dashboards is so that analysts, business users, managers, various forms of people within the business are able to access that data. I don't know, I'll say make decisions. It's not always as proactive as that. They may just be checking everything's all right. They may be looking at a more operational dashboard. It may be more proactive analysis, and they may be building a business case for something. But the reality is there is an inherent decision in the outcome of them looking at their data. And I think the critical fact that we have, whether we're talking kind of reports and dashboards circa 2003, or data provided by a sort of chatbot, Gen AI kind of system, if people don't trust the underlying data, then there's a sort of fundamental problem. So I've got a sort of hypothesis around this then, that one way you can better trust your data is to know where that data has come from and how it has been created or calculated. So I think just to sort of step back from that, or to think about what data is within the context of this. In its purest form, data is not information. And I'll, sort of go into this sort of quote here. It's not objective. It is basically, it's an abstract form. If I look on a screen and there's a grid of numbers, I can see, 2,387 or 2 or 5 or a bunch of numbers on a screen. What changes that data into information is the context and our understanding of that data. So data itself, or numeric data, is totally abstract and has, it can be useful, but without something around it, and without knowing maybe where it came from, and without knowing what it represents, that data is not particularly useful for us. So again, going back to the kind of industry we work in and the work that we do, in various forms is focused on taking the data from source systems, processing that through a different, set of transformations, different set of steps, and then presenting that data to users. And again, the users, there's lots of things that give context to that data. If we're using sort of facts and dimensions, the dimension values around a fact will help give it data. And what I'm sort of proposing here is that also being aware of, or understanding, or being able to find out the lineage of the data is another factor that will help end users get value from, or get more use or better understanding of that data. So what is data lineage in that context? And I think, again, going back to the sort of classic diagram of what we look at, source systems start on the left of the slide. The journey of data, or the data journeys across that slide going from left to right. It goes through a set of transformations. It goes through a set of systems. Depending on our age, what kind of tools we're using, where we are, we could be writing ETL. We could be data engineers writing data pipelines. We could be storing it in data warehouses. We could be storing it in data lakes. Maybe it's just a bunch of stuff stuck in object storage or something. We will be then consuming that data, potentially through Oracle DB, maybe just through Excel, maybe through tools like Tableau. So there's lots of different consumption points that we bring that data. But the lineage of the data is the path that data travels from its source through to the point of consumption by an analyst, by a report, someone looking at a report, by an executive in the business. So again, just to emphasize the key points is where it came from and what's happened to it along the way. And so again, sort of typically, we work in a fairly heterogeneous world. There are lots of different platforms. Those platforms may have individual metadata in them. Each area within that will potentially enrich, change, enhance, and modify the data. There is often an individual or separate metadata, or there are separate metadata repositories that are related to each of these stores. And again, I think what we're trying to do through Lineage is try and tie that together so we can kind of tell a story of the data and get a picture of the data. This is a screenshot on the left of some ODI mappings. This is what actually your data transformation could look like, and a screenshot on the right of then that being transformed into a visualization that actually allows you to interrogate what that lineage is. So why would you do this? So I think the benefits of data lineage are, if we start with data literacy, and data literacy, I think in some ways is a little bit of a checkbox exercise for organizations, but is actually sort of fundamental to that whole process of understanding data. And I think it goes far further than, can I use Tableau? Can I use Oracle DB? it is fundamentally how we or people in an organization can act with data. Even if you're in a data input job or something, if you understand the value or what happens to that data, if you say enter it wrong. So if you've got a data entry job, if you rush through entering that data and you misenter data, and maybe because you haven't been given time to enter the data, and then you imagine that data being kind of process flowing through a set of transformations, it's potential that the effects of any sort of errors that you put in will be amplified through that process. Similarly, if you're a consumer of data, it's important that you understand what is actually being shown by the data. What is actually the definition of various metrics? If someone's looking at sales or a rolling sales figure, does that include returns? What is that figure actually made up on? Where in the sales sort of pipeline or set of stages that could represent a sale is the sort of event or transaction of where that actually is? So again, in terms of literacy, the Lineage tooling gives another view, gives supporting information in that. Similarly, if you're an analyst and you're being asked to build things like information requests, understanding where data is sourced from is going to be fundamental to that. If you're asked to, say, prepare some data about, the effect of a marketing campaign on certain customer segments, you may need to understand where the sales figures are, and you may need to understand, for example, how you could relate them, or whether at the moment they are related to any sort of marketing campaigns. And again, you can track back from the beginning, back into the source systems and back through things like repositories like data lakes and other systems to try and find out that information. Moving on to development. Probably a lot of us on the call work in some form of development of data and analytics systems. And there's a couple of kind of key areas here that it's useful. The first one is impact analysis. And again, this is something that works both forwards and backwards. So if you're with a user and they're looking at a report and they want to add another field into that report, let's say the report has customer in and they'd also like customer type, it would be possible to trace the customer information that is in that report already back through to the source. And then it would be easy to understand whether the additional customer attribute they wanted was in the same source table that the customer is being read from already. And again, in that case, it's let's say, a fairly simple job to do. However, if you find that that attribute isn't there and it would need to be brought in from another system, or it needs to be sort of calculated somehow, you can get a far better idea of the impact and the complexity of the work that you're going to have to do to make what would potentially be a simple change. We've got customer, can we have customer type as well? Similarly, for the other way, if there are changes in the underlying data warehouse, we're going to change the structure of the fact table. We're going to change the calculation of the rolling, sort of some rolling average of sales or something like that. Then how many reports are affected? So then you can kind of push that all the way through. And again, you can go back one further. If there are changes in the source system, again, you can see what the changes in say the data warehouse or the data lake house would be. And again, push that through all the way into the impact, to look at the impact of reports. And finally, there's an audit. This is a kind of who can see what and what is seen by whom. So the most easy example of this is personally identifiable information. If you've got information that really shouldn't be seen by various people, or credit card details, or even just email addresses and personal details. If anyone's looked at a fairly mature system, that's maybe been around for, say, 10 years of a data warehouse plus something like OAC or OAS on top, you can get an incredibly complicated nest and sort of hierarchy and self-referencing set of first mappings in terms of the data transformation from the source system into the data warehouse. And then the business transformations that will happen within the RPD. And then the who can see what in terms of the allocation of users, groups, and application roles within OBIE. So again, if we push the idea of lineage all the way through to end users, then we've got a full audit trail, or we can create a full audit trail of who can actually see what data, where is it in which report, and who can see which reports. No, just lost the slides. There we go. Taking that one step further, the sort of natural conclusion of that is data governance. And again, we've seen data lineage tools and initiatives supporting a broader data governance initiative. And what data lineage really does is it enables you to sort of operationalize, actually do something and provide the tracking and monitoring for a data governance policy. It provides that kind of audit trail so that you can actually prove both internally and externally of where, coming back to the example of data, of personally identifiable data or something like credit card data, where that information is and who can see what information. And similarly to that, it can then provide the sort of transparency and confidence that's needed then to actually, support policies or data governance policies that will enable your stakeholders to sort of trust that your data is secure and can only be seen by the different people that should be able to see it. But data lineage, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's without its challenges. So the first thing is, if it's so good, why isn't it just available out of the box anywhere? Given the focus of this is very Oracle specific. What we're looking at is lineage from ODI and Oracle, either OBIE, OAS, or OAC. The first question is, well, why doesn't ODI have it out of the box? I think there have been some, I don't know how you describe it, attempts at it, or it's been rumored as a feature. So, if it's so good, why isn't it there? The second challenge you would have is, although it's relatively easy, or it's possible, should I say, to map data together from within the kind of Oracle ecosphere, what happens if your data goes outside of that? So what happens if you add Tableau to that? What happens if you add Power BI? What happens if you got a load of data pipelines in dbt? So as you start to join more and more vendors or more systems together, you're adding layers of complexity each time. And again, you may just get to a point where you can't extract the metadata that you're going to need to drive the lineage. One of the most critical ones are black boxes. So if you imagine any sort of journey or progression of data from A to B, there will probably be some views or some materialized views or some functions or some sort of offload to some Python program, something that is probably not going to be able to be interpreted by or fully understood by a data lineage diagram. So there maybe are limitations of how deep or how accurate the lineage can be. And from an adoption point of view, I mean, it's not something I've really seen used a lot. I don't know from people that are listening how many people have ever used a data lineage tool. I do remember, and to show my slide age and of whatever, but using Oracle Warehouse Builder, and I'm pretty sure that had a feature in it where you could bring up mappings and you could right-click on a column and it would show you the journey of that column through at least the mapping and potentially further. So for me as a developer, I can see that impact analysis use case. From a business user, I think there's probably, I'm not sure people are going to jump into using data lineage tools on, sort of first thing. So what are the options of sort of implementing this? Oracle used to have a tool called Oracle Enterprise Metadata Management. I think this is still around. There's still a web page for it. I know it was generally seen by people we worked with as very expensive and potentially for this kind of solution, prohibitively expensive. I've also heard it's either deprecated or I wouldn't say not supported, but I'm not actively sold. So I don't know what its exact status is. And apologies to anyone from Oracle if I've misrepresented that in any way. You could buy a third-party tool. There are various sort of data quality, data governance tools, things like sort of Calibra or very, tools to support data governance initiatives right across the organization that will provide support across different kind of vendors' tools. But again, this is often a very top-down, expensive, sort of transformational. It's not something maybe done bottom up in terms of the process. So again, I'm not saying those tools aren't good, but it's not maybe something that you would do as a sort of data professional in terms of we should do this. You could build your own. And again, the metadata is there. Most of the information is there. Or you could use one that we baked earlier. So really our experience in terms of hitting repeated questions or repeated problems has meant that we've built accelerators, we've built snippets of code, and then we've put those together and joined them up and then hardened them and sort of improved them, iterated them over time, which is where we got to where we are today. So Rittman Mead's Lineage Toolkit. So it uses metadata available in ODI and Oracle Analytics. And by Oracle Analytics, what I mean is OBIE, OAC, should I say, and OAS, fundamentally the same metadata. It does take the end-to-end journey of that data all the way from source to the data warehouse, lakehouse, lake, through the semantic layer, through the reports and dashboards to the user. And it does provide some exploration and visualization. In terms of a sort of walkthrough of the steps of the data, I'll sort of summarize this, and the slides are available to sort of go into more detail. But starting from ODI, we do extract the data from the repository, and that's then loaded into our own schema. The same with the data from the RPD and the web catalog. There's a data model sat in the middle. There's a set of materialized views that presents the data or sets the data up ready for consumption. And then there's a couple of tools that we'll talk about, GraphViz, Neo4j, in terms of actually consuming the data. So in terms of taking the data out of ODI or extracting the data, there's a couple of ways that we've attempted or tried. The first one is to use the ODI client and use a set of Groovy scripts. This effectively uses the APIs and I would call it the correct route. You can do it directly in SQL, but if you do it directly in SQL, then as the versions of ODI changes, the repository design and structure may change, and the SQL scripts may not work as you upgrade from one version to another. Similarly, with the Oracle Analytics, there are various extract methods from the RPD, ultimately dropping it or extracting to CSV, or the relevant information to CSV has been the most effective. However, we have tried a number of different approaches, including exporting the RPD to XML and then parsing that. So again, there are different ways. The web catalog, again, there are ways of extracting that into a CSV. The permission side of it can be complicated depending on what does your authentication. You do need to be able to get the full lineage in terms of the security support. You do need to potentially, if you're using, say, IDCS, then join up, be able to extract from IDCS the relationship between your users, groups, and roles. And again, that's the same if you're using, say, Azure or some other authentication method. And then to tie that back one step further into not only who can see, but how it's being consumed, you can actually attach or merge the usage tracking data with that as well. So once the data is read, it's then put in a data model. There's really a couple of layers to the data model, and there's sort of mapping across those kind of different sources of database to ETL tool to reporting tool. So there's a concept of a schema, which for a database is a schema, but for something like in the RPD, we're talking about a subject area, or in the WebCat, we're talking about a folder. There's an entity, which is a table in the database or a report, and an attribute, which will be a database column or an attribute. So the way that the graph database will work is it needs that sort of harmonized sort of view on the different kind of things that are there. And then, as I said, there's a set of materialized views that shape the graph into a set of into a structure ready for loading into a graph database. In terms of going through the analysis and looking at how to sort of explore this data, the structure of the data and the kind of exploration best suits a graph database. And graph databases are designed to handle data in a way that sort of emphasizes relationships between things. So that's what we want to look at. How are these things, how are the columns, how are the tables, how are the different entities related together? So there is some terminology within a graph database. Entities are typically called nodes or vertices, and the connections between them are called edges. And what they give you is a tool to sort of analyze networks of these connections between different objects. And so you can sort of walk through that. And again, here's just a screenshot of looking. So I can see various different types of objects and how they're linked together. So then visualizing the data at very low volume, we did look at using the network charts in Oracle Data Visualizer. That does get you the kind of same kind of looking graph as something here. We used a tool called GraphViz as another option, and this generated a set of static cross-navigable SVG files. So it took the graph structure and then almost just created a directory structure that you could start at the top level index file and then navigate through. And the screenshot I showed earlier of the visualization was from that. The advantages of that was it's totally local to someone's machine. You don't have to be running a server. It's a sort of, fire once and then you can explore. One of the downsides on that is the generation time for large repositories can be quite prohibitive. It's pretty CPU intensive. And the most recent method we've used is an open source graph database called Neo4j with a dedicated graph engine and the sort of built-in a whole suite of visualization tools there. So again, once you've got the data structured and so you can explore in this graph database, the next step is to find different ways of visualizing it. And so there's a kind of two-step process in running a load of extracts and then looking at the data. I'm going to hand over to Luke, who's going to show you a real-world running demo of what I've been speaking about.
Yeah. Cheers, John. I'll just take over now. So, as John mentioned, the Lineage toolkit uses multiple sources, so such as ODI or OA. So I thought we should start at ODI. So in ODI, there are two schemas. We have the source schema and we have the target schema. In the source schema is raw data, and that raw data is turned into usable data in the target schema. So for example, in this mapping, dim products, we have the products raw data, which is turning into the dimension products. This dimension is then merged with many other dimensions into a target table and into a fact table. This fact is then used in the RPD. So the RPD is 3 layers. There's the physical layer, the logical business layer, and the presentation layer. The physical layer is essentially a copy of the target schema in ODI, and then that is moved into all data in the physical layer is moved into the logical business layer, where other data manipulation happens. And then the presentation layer is a subset of data from the logical business layer for security purposes, so not everyone can see every piece of data. Once data is in the presentation layer, it can then be used in reports. So, for example, here's an report on order details. We have the date, we have details about the products, and quantity, and revenue. And as an end user, you would only see these values. And with the Lineage toolkit, you could find out how or where these come from, where these values are derived. So to use the Lineage toolkit, you first need to extract the data from your domains. So for this example, I'll be going through how you would set up the ODI environment. So first, you would need to write your connection details for ODI. So you would enable it, or you name your source, you'd enable it, exclude any projects you don't want to see Lineage for, and then you can write your username, password, and connection path. Once you have done that, you can extract your data, and it will extract your data into two tables, an attribute table and a link table. The attribute table is objects within ODI, so columns, tables. And the link table is your relationships between those objects. So how those columns connect, what feeds into what. Once you have these tables, once you've extracted all the data, you can then visualize it. The visualizer will compile this data into materialized views. The materialized views are these down here. It's the vertex tables, the edge tables, and the tracer tables. The vertexes are your objects again. So these will be, as you can see, they're in layers. So you've got your environments, your mappings, your schemas, your tables. Your edges are which objects, which vertexes connect to each other. So you can see which environments connect to which. And then your tracer traces these edges. So you can see more than just one. You can deep dive into your lineage. Having these materialized views means that we can generate SVGs using graphics. So once we run the visualize script, it will also produce these SVGs. And this is the splash page for our Lineage toolkit. As you can see, we have the ODI environment on the left with the source schema and the target schema as mentioned, which then move into the RPD, this is the physical layer, which moves into the presentation layer over here, which then moves in to the web catalog, which is your front end with the reports. This tool is quite good for smaller data sets, but when you start getting larger data sets with tens or hundreds of tables in a schema, it starts getting too complicated, and like John said, it takes too long to run. That's why we started using Neo4j. With Neo4j, we still want to use the materialized views, so we would still run the visualize script, as we could take the data from the materialized views, export it as a CSV, and then you can import it into Neo4j. And then in Neo4j, you can use it to create a data model. So for a data model, we have nodes and relationships. Nodes are your layers and your objects. So we have the domain, we have the schemas and entities and attributes and the mappings. And those can be defined using the files that we've extracted from materialized views. You can then define the connections between these nodes, or you can reference the node itself. So you can see which schemas for example, we can see which schema references which schema. So once you've built your data model, you can import your data. You can run the import. This will extract the data from the files and import it into the graph database. Once it's imported, you can then query your data. So on the left here, you have information on the database. You've got the nodes, which are your objects, your layers. You've got the relationships, which is how the layers connect, how the objects connect, and then properties, which are the properties of the nodes. So in the nodes, they have sets of information. So for example, if we click domain here, it will produce a small query that will view every domain. And as you can see, we've got ODI, we have the RPD layer, and then we've got WebCat. You can also interact with the relationships. So you can view ODI, and you can view how the data flows from ODI through RPD to WebCat. You can also view how different layers interact. So if we use domain to schema as an example, you can see the ODI has a source schema and a target schema, and how the other environments also have their schemas. You can also write your own queries if you want using the Cypher language, and those can be saved as search phrases in a perspective. And that leads on to the next tab, the Explore tab. In the Explore tab, you look at a perspective, which is essentially a worksheet, and each worksheet can save its own queries that a user can use whenever they want. And there are two ways to visualize your graph, your database even. You can either build your own query. So using the properties from earlier, we can recreate the domain and schema visualization. So we'll type domain, any, and then schema. If we run that, it produces a result of every domain connecting to their schemas. You can also run more complicated queries using search phrases. So to do that, I've created some search phrases beforehand. For example, we'll have a look at a mapping for an example. For this, you need to type in show mapping, the name of the mapping you want to look at, and the level of detail that you want to view it at. So if we look at the dim products mapping that we were looking at earlier, we type in show mapping, we will type dim products, and then let's look at it on the schema level. There we go. So as you can see in the green, we have the mapping name. You can see which entities relate to this mapping. So we have products and dim products down here. And then you can see which schema these entities are in. So you can see in the source schema, we have products. You can also double click on the node to give extra information. So you can see that it's in the schema source and it's in the ODI domain. We can then see that this moves to dim products, which is the dimension for products in the target, which moves into dim products down here, which is the RPD physical layer. Now, you can also look at the attributes in a report and find how those attributes are derived. So if we head back to the dashboard, say we can look at how this quantity value is derived. If we go to criteria, so we need to grab the formula for this column. So we grab the formula, and then we can use this query that I generated before, which is showing the lineage for an attribute, where you just need the attribute name and the level of detail again. So we use show lineage for attribute, paste in the formula, and then let's view it at the domain level. As you can see, that has generated a lineage for how we get this value, or what feeds into this value. So here we have the formula. We've got the same report name and the same folder, and it's in the WebCat environment. This is fed by the presentation layer, and you can see multiple nodes feed into the presentation layer before that. For our next steps, we would like to implement Lineage in Oracle Graph, which is a new feature for Oracle 23c and autonomous databases. With that, I'll pass it back to John.
Thank you very much, Luke. Let me just grab the screen share back. There we go. Right, so challenges and limitations, as I've said, really, things like expressions are covered, and there was a way we were able to extract at least basic expressions through the Graph Viz tool. Materialized views, procedures, functions, again, they will be opaque. There will be a black box. Other data pipeline and processes. At the moment, there was a question we had about OCI, some of the Oracle Integration Cloud. And again, that's something that we'll look at in time. However, for the moment, the work that we've done is just focused on ODI. Same thing with reporting tools. And then finally, the interface and visualization. As Luke said, we are looking in particular with the graph integration in 23C. However, you know, sort of maybe finding, how should I say, the right visualization tool, depending on maybe the sort of class of user, is sort of challenging. And, you know, there are, you know, some people want to see like top down, they want to see everything and then drill, whereas other people want to have very specific queries, starting with, as Luke finished the demo, we're sort of for this like field and this report, where did this come from? So there are actually quite a wide set of use cases that go through it. So next steps, as we said, we would like to use the graph features on 23C. At the moment, there's a sort of, you know, Docker image that's a development release, and we've experimented on that. But again, we're conscious that we wanted to have something that we can deploy to clients. So we've tried to keep things sort of GA or open source where possible. We would like to use more visualization options. Again, as I said, there's quite a wide range of use cases. We are building and have built, have almost completed an Apex interface for the metadata management. So again, as Luke demonstrated there, there's a command line interface to it. And again, it's something that maybe for two things: one, for ease of execution, but the other for sort of logging and knowing how up to date information was. And every presentation, or any presentation these days, needs to mention Gen AI and LLMs. So again, is this something that could be used, maybe using RAG, maybe using other techniques, to provide more of a sort of natural language query to it? And you know, you could have your little data lineage chatbot. Where did my measure quantity field come from? And again, you get more specific answers from that. Probably the key bit is the extraction of the data. Even the Gen AI LLM bit, it really comes down to the sort of more visualization or more query or interpretation options. So in conclusion, data lineage can provide and support that context to data. The context is critical to understanding and therefore using the data. And related to that, data lineage can be a key component in some kind of data governance and potentially data literacy initiatives. Black boxes, functions, procedures, things like that are a weakness of the system. It will be opaque. It may disappear. If you start to think about more cross-platform, there is no standard sort of metadata model. I think around 15 years ago, when business objects, Cognos, were individual companies, and Oracle, there was talk of providing or creating a common metadata language for tools. I don't think that's been taken forward. I haven't seen anything about it. It will mean that the metadata is bespoke to every tool. And I think the adoption is interesting of data lineage. As I say, a little bit comes down to the ease of use and visualization. Depends if you're talking to developers or you're talking to end users. But the adoption, even if you had a magic wand and you could do all this, how would you get people to use it? Would it be useful for them? So, I think the actual effort and thought needed to get people to use this is significant. So I think my summary is that data lineage can help you rebuild that trust in that data. So going back to that original scenario of, do I trust my data? I feel this is something you can do and can be a building block to help you get or provide trust for your users in your data. A couple of blog articles, further reading, and any questions?
Wow, that was superb. And Luke, just to have it on the recording, great job. Really, I don't know what you were nervous about. Really, really well done. And
thank you.
As always, John, really good to hear people who've been at the coalface and done it. And you can see the solutions that you're creating are based on that. So I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. There were 3 questions answered in Q&A. And if you want to have a quick peek at those audience, you'll find them on the Answered tab of Q&A. But with that, all that remains really is for me to say thank you so much. The recording for this will be put up on the website and in YouTube within the next week or so. And then a few weeks from now, we'll see you in Redwood Shores, Building 300. Really easy to get to, and it'd be great to see you all in person at the summit. So with that, thank you so much. I'm going to draw this to a close. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.